It's been a drab couple of videos these past few days, but amidst all the rage and chaos surrounding Star Wars Battlefront 2, I do have some good news to share with you guys. There are obviously a lot of problems with Battlefront 2, all of which I've talked about extensively throughout the past couple of videos, but chief among them is the predatory and exploitative loot boxes that teeter on pay to win, or rather gamble to win, due to the tangible effect that they have on the overall gameplay experience. That's sort of at the core of where the latest outrage against EA really began, which then escalated when players found out that they're locking Luke fucking Skywalker behind 40 hours of grind, or that they're limiting the daily number of credits you can earn through arcade mode. And that outrage has echoed loud and clear all over the world throughout the past couple of days over social media and gaming forums. And one particular country that's been paying attention is Belgium. It has recently come to my attention that according to Belgium news outlet VTM, Belgium's Gaming Commission, which regulates gambling in the country, is currently investigating loot boxes in video games to determine if they can be constituted as gambling. Currently, they're primarily focused on two titles, Star Wars Battlefront 2 and Overwatch. Great places to start if you ask me. The former is the most egregious form of loot boxes we have seen yet in a premium AAA title, while the latter is what popularized the abhorrent feature and kickstarted the whole loot box movement until it evolved into what it is today. Here's a quote from website PC Games N, translating and paraphrasing the information from VTM. The Commission's director, Peter Naessens, says that if your ability to succeed in the game is dependent on random outcomes, in this case the contents of loot boxes, then the Commission will have to consider it a game of chance. If there is a game of chance, says Naessens, it is not possible without a permit from the Gaming Commission. Assuming the Commission finds that the loot box system is indeed a game of chance, EA would potentially be forced to pay fines up to hundreds of thousands of euros or see the game removed from shelves. Overwatch is also part of the investigation, but based on the Commission's specification of in-game performance as a factor, its cosmetic options seem less likely to come under fire. While it is true that Overwatch's cosmetic-focused loot boxes are far less intrusive than Battlefront 2's loot box progression system, there is no denying that it is still a form of gambling. You can still pay real money to gamble for rewards in this game. And I know people will excuse Overwatch by saying that it's just cosmetics, but cosmetics do matter to some people, and they can be equally, if not more addictive than gameplay upgrades. After all, if you think about it, gameplay upgrades happen in the background, while cosmetics are things you get to show off to other people, which is why some people find more value in the latter. I'm not saying that the loot boxes in Overwatch ruin the experience like they do in Battlefront 2, but I do still think that some form of regulation is required, particularly in the form of having these games warn potential consumers that a form of gambling does exist, whether it's by having the game's rating reflect that or by pushing in-game notifications that are very clear about the loot box gambling system. But hey, one step at a time. Before we can take the conversation that far, we need to make sure that the worst cases of loot boxes, like a game whose entire progression system revolves and depends on gambling, are investigated first. So I'll be just as glad to mainly focus on Battlefront 2 and its shitty practices. Here's another translation from the Belgian website, this one courtesy of website Kotaku. The article says it's a particular concern for the Commission when the game is available for and marketed towards children, like Overwatch and Battlefront 2 are. In Europe, both titles have a PEGI rating of 12. Naessens says loot box systems can be a particular danger to minors because of the societal pressure to spend more money to, in Battlefront's case at least, boost their strength. VTM reports that if loot boxes were indeed found to be a form of gambling, then the Gaming Commission would need to provide a permit. It's illegal to operate gambling business in Belgium without one. An investigation could also lead to a fine of up to hundreds of thousands of euros and the game being taken off shelves in Belgium. It would also presumably set a precedent that would affect any other publishers operating similar business practices. Yes, yes, and yes, the exposure of loot boxes to minors should definitely be a major cause for concern. While it is true that children may not be carrying around credit cards to pay for loot boxes, they are still exposed to the idea of loot boxes and gambling by playing these games because they're everywhere. In Overwatch, you get a loot box every time you level up, and in Battlefront 2, you have to purchase them with in-game currency or with premium currency to progress through the game. So even if minors aren't necessarily able to pay for these loot boxes, they are still getting a whiff of what gambling for video game rewards such as cosmetics or upgrades is like. It's the equivalent of a casino manager approaching minors and giving them free spins of their slot machines every hour or so. Just because they're not paying at that moment doesn't mean they're not potentially being intoxicated by this idea of gambling. There's a reason why we don't expose minors to gambling of any kind. There's a reason why they aren't allowed to gamble in casinos, and the same regulations should apply for gambling systems in video games. Hell, they should especially apply to video games because it's a medium that appeals to a lot of younger people. And before you argue that it's different in video games because you aren't technically betting for money, gambling doesn't always have to be about money. Gambling is constituted as anything involving someone taking a risky action in the hope of a desired reward. A risky action is spending $100 on a bunch of crystals for Battlefront 2 in the hopes that the loot boxes you spend them on will yield a desired result. Now, obviously, the legal definition of gambling isn't quite as clear-cut, but that's the point of this conversation, to expand that legal definition to encompass the predatory paid loot boxes, because they are by definition gambling. We'll have to wait and see where Belgium's investigation goes, but if these loot boxes are found to be a form of gambling, EA may have to pull Battlefront 2 from the country and be fined up to hundreds of thousands of euros, which would be a great victory. Now, that kind of money is just a drop in the bucket for EA, and yes, Belgium isn't the biggest market for games, so even if all goes well, it probably won't have too much of an effect on the company's profit margins and whatnot. But if Belgium successfully calls out Battlefront 2 for what it really is, the important thing is the domino effect that could have. It's worth noting that this isn't the first time we have heard about other countries trying to regulate this stuff. In one of my previous videos, I talked about how the UK is fighting back against loot boxes by letting the issue be known to members of parliament. While I wouldn't say that things have been progressing at a breakneck speed, it's still a significant stepping stone. And now we're hearing that Belgium's Gaming Commission is doing a full investigation on the matter, focusing on Battlefront 2 in particular. And you know, that's how major reforms begin, just one little drop in the water that causes a wide-reaching ripple effect. So while I don't expect to see major changes happen until ways down the line, I can feel the conversation being started and the issue slowly crawling into the limelight, especially after EA's latest PR nightmare. It may take a while before we get somewhere substantial, but I firmly believe that one of these days, as these greedy game publishers keep pushing the envelope, there will come a time when they push too far and they'll suffer the consequences. Now, do temper your expectations. Microtransactions and loot boxes are probably not going anywhere. I don't think we can get rid of them outright at this point, but if some regulations can be enacted so that these greedy publishers don't have full autonomy over how they can exploit and milk money from their consumers, that will be a big win right there. So yeah, fingers crossed that Belgium's investigation leads to a desired result. With that, I would like to end this news update. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you found this video insightful, and if you enjoy my content, consider supporting me on Patreon. All contributions will go towards helping us remain 100% independent and self-sustained. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.